When a hacker wants to compromise an organization, first of all, he starts selecting the target. Then he starts trying to find domains, email passwords related, websites, and then start digging into the infrastructure behind, versions of OS, versions of databases, web servers. Why? Because he needs to start ready to focus into the specific attacks for that specific infrastructure. That's the first step that they will follow. We, as a penetration testers, we need to do exactly the same. And this is our first course of the certification. We are going to teach you how to find information about the targets, how to gather all the information needed in order to focus our attacks efforts. At the end, of course, we're going to recommend the best solutions for us in order to prevent those attacks and protect our organization. So this is the agenda. The first step is scoping. Scoping means we need to enumerate our targets. We have different techniques we're going to show you. The second step is fingerprinting. Once we have the target list, we need to know exactly the details of those versions, type of application behind. Is a PHP, ASP, web servers, IIS, Apache, Tomcat. We need to get those informations. Once we get it, we go to the crawling. Crawling is going to give us a map of our site. Keep in mind that we are not attacking the whole infrastructure. We are only concentrating in web-based applications. That's why we need to do crawling, which is going to help us to get a map of the whole site. Finally, we have the summary with all what we learned in this specific course. Let's go to the scoping. So we need to find web applications. There are multiple ways to do it. Let's say that the customer tells us, here is my domain name, and go for it. Try to find all the websites that you can and start trying to attack them. That's one approach, which is possible. So what we can do here is we can use tools like Dig or any other tools related to DNS enumeration that can help us to know all the different hosts associated with that specific domain, like in this case, target.com. The next step, or another technique, can be do port scanning. Port scanning is not recommended if you are in internet trying to scan a specific network, because you're going to be blocked. This port scanning is useful when you are inside the network, and then you can just search for local servers in specific ports. You can say, give me all the servers which has the port 80 open, which means is the web server. There are other ports like 443, 8080. So that's another technique that you can use, but keep in mind, this is more recommended to do it internally. Another approach is that the customer gives us a list of websites. It doesn't say just find whatever you want. It gives us a list of specific web applications that we need to try to find vulnerabilities. So different approaches. We have a very cool tool that we are going to teach you in our labs, which is called the Harvester, that comes installed in Kali. And basically what you are just going to say is -D, which is an option, and the target domain, whatever domain you want, and then you're going to mention the engine that you want to use. Can be Google, LinkedIn, Bing, or all of them. And it's going to start looping through internet and try to find all information about that specific domain. Like in this screenshot, it is able to identify for that specific domain email accounts, which can help to deliver another kind of attacks, or it's going to list you all the different websites related to that domain. That can give us a list of our targets. It's a good start. So we can see that we have many options in order to identify the potential targets. Once we have the targets, we move to the next step, which is fingerprinting. What are the technologies behind those assets that we just identified? We can try to get the web server
a web server brand, which is very important. Because if we have a web server like Apache, we can concentrate on technologies in order to try to penetrate that specific web server. But if it is IIS, it's totally different approach. It's running on Windows, the other one in Linux or Unix-like systems. So it depends. That's why we need to identify the servers and the Windows or Linux or any other operating system version. One of the simple techniques that we are also explaining in our labs is head request. It's a valid HTTP specification protocol, and this is a valid command that you can just submit a head, as you can see there, slash, and the HTTP version. And depending on the response, normally you get a banner. The banner is telling you, okay, I am an Apache server, IIS server. It depends. And it's useful for us to identify the web server version and web server name. Sometimes there is people that they hide this information. So it's just like the 101 approach. But we have other ways to identify it in case they are trying to hide the web server version. The other way is we can also try to get header fields in the response. So let's say that we send a request, we get a response back from the web server, and the way they order the HTTP headers can also tell us who is behind. Some of them put first the date and then the host, for example. So depending on the HTTP headers order can also help us to say this looks like Apache or this looks like Tomcat, for example. Malform request. We can also send some request, HTTP request, which is not accepted, which is not in the HTTP specification. And the response, the error response received from the web server can tell us who is responding. Like here, we can do an HTTP with version 5.0, which doesn't exist. It's going to throw an error. Based on the error, we can say who is behind. Just another example. Another way is also to run Nmap. Again, that's when you are inside the network, either because the customer allowed you to now start scanning inside, or because you were able to penetrate into the local network. Here, you can use Nmap to put the port, in this case 80, 443, 8080, those ports related to web server, and you need to try to find those specific hosts, and with the -O in Nmap, it's going to try to find the OS version, which is really helpful, and it has specific signatures in order to identify those different OS versions. That's pretty useful too, because sometimes you can have an Apache web server, but that doesn't mean it's running in Linux. It can be running on Windows too, or Mac OS X. Another tool pretty useful is HTTP print. With that one, you just pass again the IP, and it will read as signatures again in order to try to identify what is the web server behind. We're going to see some examples in our labs. So right here we have HTTP print, and you can see that there is a signature right there, which is kind of saying, okay, so this guy, this looks like Nginx, based on the response received. Nginx is just another web server brand. Okay, another way is with Netgraph. Netgraph is a really good website, has existed for probably 15 years or more, and that website holds different information about websites. Specifically for us, it will give us information like the last date seen that specific web server, what was the version running, what was the operating system, the IP address, and that is very useful. For example, for Google, if in Google you try to search for the web server version, it will do so many techniques to try to hide it. But here we can clearly see that it is GFE, which is Google Front End. It's a proprietary web server created by this search engine. Another technique, WhatWeb. So Web comes pre-installed in Kali. It's pretty cool also. And when you run it, you will get this kind of results, which basically says like, okay, this is the country where this specific web server is located. This is the specific security features like HTTP only. We will learn those specific features in another course. It can tell you obviously what is the web server behind, like in this case GWS, and other security controls. But related to identifying the web server behind, as you can see there, it can give us that information and many other information which can be useful. So we can see that we have many options in order for us to try to identify the web server and the OS behind. But what about content management systems? You know what is that? It's like WordPress, like Joomla, heavily used nowadays for quick blogs that you can post in your websites. Those ones has been a real high target by the attackers lately. But at the same time, they have improved a lot in terms of security because they have been hacked many times that they are improving in security. The problem is that they are also now supporting plugins. That means that a specific customer, a specific organization can create a plugin that is going to work with WordPress, let's say, but the developers behind that plugin is totally different than the developers in WordPress. That means different security cycles can introduce new vulnerabilities. So that's the case for one of the plugins, which is called WP Membership. That plugin was vulnerable recently. That specific plugin, we have a really cool lab where we show how the cross-site scripting is being exploited. Cross-site scripting is another course that we're going to teach you, so don't worry. We really encourage you to look at that specific lab. Another tool here to identify CMS is Blind Elephant. That's created by Qualys, which is a well-known company doing vulnerability analysis and hazard scanner. They can identify Drupal, Joomla, PHP Nuke, MediaWiki, WordPress, some of the well-known CMS out there. The way it works is just like they have a specific directory names, resources names, and they just try to look for them by doing some requests. And if they get a match, and with the content sometimes, they will say, okay, looks like WordPress, this looks like Joomla. And that can also help you because sometimes you don't know what is behind a specific web application. But if you suddenly realize it's WordPress, for example, that can definitely focus your effort into finding vulnerabilities in that specific CMS. It's very useful. Another important enumeration here is database identification. Again, we can do just a port scan on the well-known ports for every specific DB engine. For MySQL is port 3306. You know, for Postgres is 5432, and the same for all the other DB engines. If you find it open, that means can be potentially a DB engine running in that specific port, and then we can know if it is MySQL or what is being used in that specific organization. Also, when we are doing some SQL injection, again, that's another course within this certification that we're going to learn. But via SQL injection, we can also always get the database version. Like, for example, here we can use with MySQL the select version also for Postgres. And you can see some examples of some different DB engines with the command in order to get the version for the database. We can also do a string concatenation. Let's say that we cannot get the version by executing those commands. We can try to do a concatenation in the SQL query, and if we get a result, that means it was understood, that specific SQL syntax was understood, and that tells us this might be this specific DB engine. Like here, let's say that we do a concat A plus A, and that gives us a concatenation in the result. We know that it is been understanding that specific syntax. Let's say that we do like the Microsoft SQL syntax, which is just A plus A. So by doing those checks, If that syntax is understood in the backend, that can give us clue that what is the specific database engine. We can do also error-based response. Like in this case, we force a specific SQL query, which we know is not valid, but we wait for the response. And based on the response, we can decide what is behind. MySQL, for example, is going to return a null. Postgres SQL can return a division by zero error. As you can see, Oracle, different error, Microsoft SQL. So as you can see, based on the error, it's pretty easy to identify what is the DB engine behind. Unexpected single quote, that's kind of the most well-known SQL syntax error received by pen testers. It is pretty well known. So also if you get an error message in the SQL syntax, you will, for example, for MySQL, you can right away say, oh, this is check your syntax that corresponds to your MySQL. So that's very clear that is MySQL behind, right? For Postgres, it also says something like pg-exec. So when you see the pg-exec, okay, this is Postgres, right? You need to start getting common with those different strings. Oracle always starts with ORA dash and the error number. Very well known, very useful. Microsoft SQL Server, as you can see, it always says Microsoft SQL Server and the error. So we can see that it is also pretty easy by getting errors to identify the database behind. Okay, so now that we understood what are our targets, that we get all the information of our targets, it's time to start getting an overview of that specific application. We're going to use a technique that is called crawling. Crawling means we're going to be able to visit that site in an automated way so that it can give us the map of the site with all the different sections and different resources so that we can understand the whole picture of our application. For that, we can use automated crawling. It's useful, as I said, for application mapping. You will get an overview of all the different sections inside that application. We're going to do that in our labs with Burp Suite. That specific tool, Burp, is pretty useful, it's open source, and it's very powerful. Some of those crawlers are able to identify only references. Like if you get a web page, and in that web page you get a link, the crawler is going to follow that link, right? But if there is no links in those pages, let's say that there is an admin section in the page, but that admin section is not being referred in any of the pages, the crawler is going to miss it because it's not going to find it. It needs to find those references within the source page in order to follow them. Some of them can brute force it and can say, let me check if there is an admin, administrator, PHP my admin. It's another way for the crawler to identify by guessing specific directories. It can use credentials for authentication. So let's say that it is crawling and eventually gets to a login form. It will be able to say, okay, this is a form. I can submit a username and password in an automated way in order to get into that specific section and keep crawling. But most of the time, it's not possible because keep in mind we're doing a black box approach. In the black box approach, we don't have credentials. We're just trying to get into the organization as any other hacker. But here is a very important point. Every time you do these kind of efforts, penetration testing efforts, you need to have two phases. Phase one is the black box, totally blind. And the second phase must be with authenticated credentials. And the reason of that is because sometimes you will have multiple users with multiple privileges and therefore different sections inside the application. And if you don't go to those different users, you might miss vulnerabilities. So it's very important for you to do the black box approach, you finish, you do your findings, and then request for authenticated credentials in order to test also valid users. Because keep in mind that you can be a valid user, but that doesn't mean you cannot have vulnerabilities. It's important to test all those different sections too. Tools, as I said, OWASP has ZAP, which is good, but I would recommend Burp Suite, which is better.
Can we go start back at tools? You scratched your mic.
Yeah.
Let's just go back 1 point.
In tools?
Yeah.
Okay.
On 3, 2, 1.
Oh. Okay, so tools. We can use OWASP, which comes with SAP. SAP is a well-known tool. It's good, but I would recommend Burp Suite, which in my opinion is more powerful. It's open source, same as SAP, but more powerful. We're gonna do some exercises in our lab. Here in the crawling, it's very important to find the entry points. The entry points will tell us where are the potential attacks that we as a pen testers can try to find vulnerabilities. Where are the entry points? Obviously, when talking about a web application, it can be the get, the post parameters, the HTTP headers, cookies, every section where you need to upload a file, the resources that receive parameters. So all those different options are the most common entry points in a web application, and you need to identify them in order to try to find vulnerabilities. A crawler can miss specific subsections, as I said, because of lack of credentials to authenticate. But also, let's imagine that you have in a web application that you are doing a payment. In that application, it will require a credit card information, expiration date, secure number, and if you don't provide those details, it won't be able to move to the next step, which is probably another form, right? So in these specific scenarios, the crawler might miss those sections, which means we might miss vulnerabilities. The way it works is normally we get fake credit cards in this scenario so that we can put it and feed our crawler in order to be able to provide them at runtime and start identifying new sections. That's why it's very important to choose a crawler which is able to be customized in order to put specific fields into the different login forms or any form identified during crawling. If you have a crawler that is not able to be customized to do that, it won't be able to identify all the different sections. Multi-step wizards, as I said, is not only about credit card information, but let's say that you are filling out your billing information, and then when you click next, you need to click on a specific date of birth in a specific country and all those different details, and then move to the next step, which is like the school you were studying. So all those different details, if they are not filled out properly, it will just deny it to move forward, and then you will miss sections in your web application. CAPTCHAs, for example, too. If you get a CAPTCHA, that's a totally different story. You won't be able to move forward. As I mentioned, lack of access to profiles. What we need to do in this case, as I suggested, is educated crawling. There is a concept called macros. The macros is, as you remember probably, in the office, you have macros where you can record all your actions. You click here, there, you put a sum, whatever, everything is recorded, right? That's a macro. In web, we have the same concept. Basically, you're gonna go to this website, click here, click there, fill out a form, click submit, do a search. All those steps are recorded in a macro, and then the scanner is gonna take that recording and scan. That's pretty powerful, and it's very good in those cases where you need to provide a specific information. There are many scanners, commercial ones, that supports macros. That obviously forces the analyst, the pen tester, which is us, to understand thoroughly the web application. If we miss a subsection, we are missing vulnerabilities. And there are tools like Web Inspect in this example that we can use to do the macro recording. We're going to teach you how to do that. But there are many other tools that do that. But Web Inspect probably is one of the most well-known tools out there, commercial ones, that you can benefit, and we have allowed for you. Information gathering is a key step towards vulnerability discovery. As I said, don't just jump into trying to find vulnerabilities right away. First of all, gather all the information, all the different assets, and very important, document it. Documentation is a key step also. It doesn't matter if you find a vulnerability, if you find a specific web server and you just keep it for yourself, normally you are working with a team of pen testers. It is very important for you guys to document everything in a centralized environment so that if you are not working on that specific asset, another teammate can find that specific issue, can take it from there and keep testing it. Or you can share knowledge. You will always need to find those specific centralized repositories. Here we introduce Dradis. We use it in our labs so that we can document all the findings. It basically, as I said, is a centralized documentation. It is shared by all team members. You just put the same password and you get in. It's not about security, it's about documentation. You can upload files also. If you find some binaries, whatever it is, you can upload it to the repository, and that whole documentation can be exported so that you can reuse it later. And as I said, it's a key step. Here is just a screenshot. It is pretty easy to use. It's just like a node, like a tree-based documentation where you put nodes, subnodes, and in every single node you can put the type of asset and all the details within that specific node, and you can upload everything there. It's pretty useful. We have a lab for that in this specific course, information gathering. Finally, the summary. So we talk about the scoping. It's very important to find the assets, the targets to be tested. We talk about fingerprinting, different techniques that we used in order to identify the web server, the versions, all the infrastructure behind our targets. We talk about crawling so that we can map all the application in order to have a clear overview, in order to also identify the entry points where we can attack the web applications. And after this, we can start trying to do the scanning, which might be the next step. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, welcome to our first course, Information Gathering, which is part of our Cybersecurity Web Application Defender certification. As you know, we are playing the gray hat hacker role here. We're going to be trying to find vulnerabilities in web applications in order to proactively report them to the organization before the hackers come and do the same. The first phase in this course is called information gathering. Information gathering is a very important step during this effort. It's where you are going to try to find all the different targets, all the different details about those targets, like operating systems, databases, web servers versions, application servers, everything you need in order to focus your tools and techniques in order to find vulnerabilities. So the first step here is called scoping within the information gathering phase. So scoping means we need to define what we need to test. Normally, there are two approaches here. The customer is going to give you a list of websites
that you wanna start testing, or the customer is gonna say, here is my domain name, just go on your own and find the targets. Keep in mind that this whole effort is called black box testing, which means we don't know anything about the organization. They don't give us any details because we are pretending to be a hacker in internet trying to break into that specific web application. So for scoping, we can try to find hosts related to that specific organization. We can use basic stuff like Dig, which is a DNS query tool. We can say like, I don't know, redhat.com, and list everything that you can find in that specific domain, and it will come with some names. Probably here is a potential one, but in this case it's good enough to know about what is behind the kind of servers that you have there, and you might find some web servers. It is a good starting approach, but after that we need to dig a little bit more. We can use tools like Nmap, for example. Let's say that you are not outside of the organization. Let's say that you are in the phase where you are connected in the local network. You can also use here in this approach Nmap to search for all the hosts listening in the web server port, which normally is port 80 or port 443. So we can say, okay, so dash p0. This means don't ping the host in order to know if it is alive. This is good option because sometimes when you try to find the host, if it is alive, it's gonna do a ping, which most of the time it is filtered. And if Nmap doesn't get a response from the ping, it won't do anything. So we are saying here, don't do ping in order to identify the host. Just go straight and connect. Then we say, okay, the port is 80. Let's say in this case, we do Verbus, and I'm just gonna run the local in my host to see if I have a web server running here. As you can see, it says port 80 open. That means I have a web server running in my local machine, but obviously you can use this, change it instead of localhost. You can use a network address, like something like this. You can do like 192.268 to 10 to, let's say, to we can actually do it like this, and then we can do dash 24. It's going to try to scan the whole C network in order to find host listening in the web port. Okay, so that's another approach. But I'm also want to show you a really good tool identified in Kali, which is called the Harvester. This tool, as you can see here, I already run it, and the reason is because it takes about, I don't know, 60 to 2 minutes sometimes, depending on your connection. So basically, it's pretty simple to use. You just say the Harvester -d, which is the domain, and then -b, which is what search engine you want to use in order to find information. And in this case, I'm saying just use Google, but you can define Bing, or you can define many other ones. You can do all, so that it just go and try to find all the different search engines that it supports in order to try to find a host related to websites. So keep in mind that here we're scoping. We're trying to find web servers for us in order to test against the organization. So by running the Harvester, we can see that there are some emails found, which might be useful for another phase or another approach. In this specific scenario, we don't need them, but after those different emails, you can see that at the end it's gonna say, okay, so host found in this search engine, and you can see that there are multiple hosts there related to that domain. Those names might be the potential targets for us. Those might be the web servers, the websites that we are looking for in order to start trying to test them and find vulnerabilities. Now, at this point, let's say that we found the scope. Let's say that by running all different options, we know exactly what is going to be our targets. So the next step is document everything, guys. It's very important to document all your findings, but not keep it to yourself, not put it in your laptop. It's very important to find a centralized way to do it. Keep in mind that during this effort, most of the time it's not only you. It is a group of people doing the testing. So you all guys need to share the findings in a effective way. So that, let's say that you do some testing, you find something, you post it in a centralized repository, and then the other teammates can use the same information to leverage or to find more bugs, or take it from there and try to go a little bit further. For this, I want to introduce a tool. Let me just copy paste this host. And I'm going to introduce a tool, guys, which is called Dradis. Dradis is a very good tool for documentation, and this is for all the teams. In order to all the findings, they can put it in a central repository. If you want to install it, you can just go in Kali and do apt-get install, Dradis install. That's going to install Dradis, and it is in the repository, so you don't need to do anything else. And then you can do service. I already have it installed, that's why I'm not running it. And then you can do just service Dradis start. Okay, and it's going to open a web server in Ruby, and it's going to listen in the port 3009. So we have it here. You can go to localhost https 3009/login. The first time you run it, you just choose a password. That password is going to be shared with all the teammates. The idea behind is that Dradis don't care much about password sharing, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to get access to the same repository. So in most of the time, you're going to be using the same password during months or different engagements. So basically, you just want to keep it in the repository. So the way it works is that as soon as you put the same password, it will connect you to the repository with the team that it is using the same password. So let's say that here I'm going to use my own login, Danux, and then my default password, which I choose, and just click login. And then here you can have a pretty simple tree-like repository. So you can do an add branch here, and you can say, okay, so this is like the organization AAA, which you are testing right now. From here you can say, okay, so add a child. No, not here. You can say here, add a child default, and here we can say, okay, we are in the information gathering phase, right? And then from here we can say, okay, so we got some information. You can see we can paste the host identified, and you can see that we can start building, our details, and everyone in the team using the same password is going to be able to see this information. Not only that, you can also always export the findings, or you can export the full project, and that can be used outside, or that export can be imported later on also within Dradis. And you can also do attachments, a binary, wherever you find, you can always attach it here. So it is pretty convenient. So we put here all the hosts identified, and we are ready with our scope.
The next step after we do the scoping is fingerprinting. Okay, so fingerprinting means we need to find what is behind our web server. What is the version running, database, OS, everything that can help us to say these are the tools and techniques we need to use in order to find vulnerabilities. So for that, let's assume we're gonna first concentrate on this host, which is televisa.com. We can add another branch here as a host, and we can say, okay, so this is all the information regarding this specific guy. I'm gonna document it here. As you can see, we are documenting based on our findings, anything that we find. So let's do some kind of fingerprinting. The first simple one is by using Netcat. Netcat is a really cool tool for many different options. One of them is just to connect like a socket client to connect to different services. So we can use it to connect to, let's say, televisa.com.mx and for 80, and we can say, okay, head, which is a HTTP protocol, and then we put the version, 2 enters, and we get a response. You can see it says, hey, this is a bad response, but we get some information. We get, okay, I'm running Apache 2.4.10 in Unix, which kind of help us to understand what might be behind. This is just one approach. We can say, okay, we gather this. Oh, sorry. We can say we gather this. And we can just come here and document it. We say add note, and we document our finding, which is related to Netcat. And we can also use Netcraft, which is just another approach. Netcraft is a really cool website where it holds many information and history about different websites, and it can tell you all different things, the country, and as you can see here, it can tell you the latest version being used as being seen for this specific server. You can see here it says Apache 2.4.10, which kind of match our finding here, which is the same server. It says it is OS Linux, which is, you know, is just another way for you to find information about this specific target. But not only that, you can also use other tools. There is another tool which is called HTTP print. You just say HTTP print.h and then the host. For this one, you first need to get the IP, which the IP we already got it in our documentation. See, this is another way for, this is another reason you guys wants to save your findings. Always you can come back and get the information. So here we got the IP. For some reason in Linux, HTTP print doesn't work well with the domain names. You need to put the IP address. So you do that -h, the IP, then -s. Here you're gonna need to use a signatures file, which basically holds all the different signatures for all the different web servers in order to find the right one. And that specific signature, you can download it directly from the website. Let me show you right here. This is the website, and there is where you can find that specific signature. So you can do like HTTP print -h, the IP. You can also do like nmap p0 so that it doesn't ping the web server in order to see if it is alive, because some of the time it's going to be blocked and it's not going to give us any results. And then -s and the signature file. You just let it go. I'm going to start trying to find information about that specific website, and basically it's just for us to confirm
that we are matching the same information in all different places. You can see here that it says banner reported Apache based on the signature here, which is also confirming what we said. And then it says confidence is almost 70%, which is really high. So right now we identified what is the web server behind. We know it's Apache, and then we can focus our efforts trying to find issues in Apache and anything that is running behind. Okay, and we can always also do, if you are lucky and the database is also exposed in the public IP, which is not common, to be honest, but it is helpful sometimes when you are in a local network. You can always do an nmap scan on port. Let's say the MySQL port is this one, and I'm gonna just run it in my local machine, but so that you guys can see the result. But at the end you can see that it says, oh yeah, it is open MySQL, and then you know that MySQL is running. But you can change the port and, you know, do any other ports for other databases, like 5432 for PostgreSQL, and 1430 I think is for MySQL Server, 1433, something like that. So you can always change the ports to try to find which is the database running in some cases. So basically that's fingerprinting. And the last tool that I'm gonna show you is called WhatWeb, which is also comes pre-installed in Kali, and it's pretty simple to use. You just say WhatWeb and the host, and it's just gonna try to find all the information about this specific host. It's gonna give you pretty cool information about the headers being used, about obviously the web server running, the country where it is located, which is pretty useful. So you can see here that it is saying, okay, the televisa.com.mx, you get a 302. That's a redirection, and that's because probably I am located in a different country than the target one. But it is saying the country. You can see here it is saying the Apache version here, the country in US, the HTTP server running, the IP, and then it is being redirected, and it's pretty cool because it's also going to the right direction, and it's gonna giving us information about the same host but in US, which is pretty interesting here to see that in US it is a different web server running, Nginx. So that's interesting. You might want to go against both, you know, US and Mexico in this case. Is depending on every single effort, and it has other options which doesn't need to be explained so far. So that's fingerprinting, and again, this whole information, it is always recommended to go and save it into your repository. So we can see here something like, okay, another note. So we have results of, in this case, WhatWeb results, and you have all the information here ready. And as I said, this is all about televisa.com.mx. You can add other hosts, and that's our fingerprinting. We know what is running behind, and we are ready to start doing some scanning. Okay, so then the final step in this specific phase is called crawling. So what we need to do now is that we identify our host, and it's time to do some understanding how it looks, the website. I'm not gonna be testing this site because obviously that's a live site, and it's not my intention to do any malicious actions. So I'm gonna use a local site I'm using WordPress, which is running locally, and we're gonna do our exercises there. So let's fire up Burp Suite. You can do in Kali Alt F2, and then you can do Burp. It's gonna complete it for you, and then you can load Burp Suite. Burp Suite it comes with a free edition and a commercial edition. So the free edition is a proxy, first of all, which can help you to intercept requests and responses coming from a website. But it can also help you to crawl the application, inject information, do some testing. I don't think it comes with a scanner, the free version, but don't worry, we're gonna use a commercial tool in a different module. But it is very cool for us in this phase for information gathering. So the first step you need to do is you go to Proxy tab, and then you go to Options, and here you can see the host where it is the host and port where it is listening, and it is local 8080. So you can go and use your web server. Let me close this. You can always go. Here is our web application, and we can change the proxy settings here in our web browser. In this case is Firefox. It depends on your browser. You go to the Advanced Network tab, Settings, and you say, okay, use a proxy. You put the host and the port, and we are ready to go. So so this is the website, and then the next step in Burp is let me explain you something quickly here. The next section is the intercept client request. If you enable this box, you're telling Burp to intercept the request they're doing. Here you can use some filters, like this one says, hey, don't intercept all the requests trying to retrieve a GIF or any image, which is normal, or GS. You don't want to intercept those things. And you also have in the next section the intercept the server responses, so that also when the response is coming back to the browser, stop it, intercept it, so that you can inspect it if needed. Okay, so now that we have that, we have everything enabled, we can go to history. We don't have anything because here is wherever you are searching. And what you need to do at this point is to start browsing. The proxy Burp is ready to sniff into the network whatever you are doing in the website, and it's going to report it here. So we're going to go and try to go to the first page of the login page of WordPress. You can see that it is not doing, the browser is not doing anything, and Burp is kind of blinking here, blinking. That's because you can see that the proxy tab is in orange. That means there is something going on there. So we go to that specific section, and we can see that the request has been intercepted. Here you can see many other details. You can see, well, it is just going to get admin and some cookies, and then you can say either drop it, so which means don't send it to the web server, or forward, which means let it go. We let it go, and then it intercepts now the response. In the response, we can see here a redirection 302, and we can see here the server and many other interesting things from penetration testing site. We can see that it is using this specific server, this specific application server, which is Apache and PHP, which can help us to know what is behind. Okay, and many other headers that can be useful. At this point, I'm just gonna stop intercepting responses. So I'm gonna say don't intercept more responses, and I'm gonna let it go. The redirection takes place, keep going, and if we go to the website,
we are in the main page of our site. Okay. At this point, you can go to the history and you can see that we have some information there because we went to those different places. If we go to the target and we expand the host, we can see that we have now something. We have here the admin and nothing inside, and we have login, which is the identified resources. Here you can do right click and say spider this branch. What it is gonna do is gonna start trying to find more resources within that specific folder. So we run it, and you can see that right away it says, hey, wait a second, I found a login post. Do you want me to put some credentials? That's pretty cool, because in this case we can say we know that this information is the form to authenticate, right? So we can definitely put something here and allow the proxy to authenticate and find more stuff. At this point, let's assume that we don't have credentials, so we don't know at this point, so we just ignore it. But it's pretty cool to know that this proxy can do that, can identify forms and submit them with the information that you can provide. So you can see here that has been crazy in just a few seconds. And now it has identified many other folders. And as you can see, many other resources and PHP applications. So now we have a better understanding of the structure of the website. You can see that we can identify multiple folders with multiple PHP resources, and you can start playing with those to see if there is something weird there. But at this point, we are able to say, okay, we have our first website, which has been identified, which has all that structure, and we are ready to focus our next effort, which is trying to find vulnerabilities. Again, this whole information, you can always put anything that you want from here into your local repository, and you're good to go. So this is Burp, and it's pretty cool, and it was gonna help you to identify all the different sections within an application. We crawl the website, and then now we have a better understanding of what is behind, in this case Apache Web Server with PHP running, with in this case all those different WordPress directories. So we have a better understanding at this point.